guys, welcome back to Panic Button Podcast, where we talk about mental health, how we get through it, why we get through it, all the good stuff. You guys already know the drill. And recently I've been having thoughts of self-sabotage, I think, where I'm doing really good mentally and I feel like I'm in a really good spot compared to where I was months ago. And if you followed this journey so far, you'd know that I had a little bit of a rough patch a couple of months ago, had a medication change, all those fun things. So it was definitely a weird transition, but I think I'm on the other side of it. I'm past the hump finally. But I think sometimes when we battle anxiety or anything along the lines of a mental illness, it sometimes plays tricks with us. And I think anxiety specifically, because I have days where I'm great, I'm super good, don't even think about anxiety or panicking or anything along those lines. But then it's like something in my brain decides to tell me well, this is weird that we're okay. Should we be worrying? So it's kind of like that self-sabotage. And I've heard a couple of people that have mentioned that before where they've said panicking about not panicking. As weird as that sounds, that's kind of what I'm experiencing lately, where it's weird that I'm having good days again and feeling like myself and just getting back into the overall swing of things. So kind of what I've done for that, for my get through it, is I've just tried to go back to distraction, tried to go back to being outside more with my son, or just going outside and taking a walk. I'm a big Lego doer, as you guys know, so getting into doing some Legos again and just trying to not have my mind go to that self-sabotage of well, why are you okay now? And it's weird that we have to do that, but I feel like we do. And I feel like I'm not alone with that. I'm sure other people have felt the same way. So I would love to hear how everyone else has gotten through that and what that's looked like. Or maybe it's just me and I'm dealing with it alone. And maybe one day you'll realize that you felt the same way and you'll be like, oh, she wasn't crazy. I know what she was talking about. But all right, rant is over with that. Self-sabotaging, not good. Don't do it. It's great that you have good days. We deserve to have these good days. And we love that. We love that for us and everyone. But without further ado, I do have special guest Alicia Giglio on here. And Alicia is actually a therapist in New Jersey, and she's been working in the mental health field for 10 years. She specializes in trauma, eating disorders, and family dysfunction. And she's also trained in EMDR, IFS, and DBT. She likes to integrate nature into her practice, and in her free time, she enjoys spending time with her dogs, snowboarding, kayaking, and baking. Without further ado, Alicia, are you here with us?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me.
Hey, good to have you on here. How are you today?
Doing well. How are you?
Oh, we're doing all right. We're hanging in there. I don't know where you're at today, but I have to mention the weather and everyone will laugh because this is what I do, because you can tell I'm from the Midwest. But we're finally having a sunny day again after some gloomy days. And it's so crazy how those gloomy days really affect your mood.
Absolutely.
I never noticed that until now.
Yeah. And even with the with daylight savings, that is a huge difference too.
Oh my God, it's the worst. I wish it didn't happen, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm definitely one of those people that was like, you know what? I would be fine without this. It throws everything off. Even my son's sleeping schedule, I feel like it really affects kids the worst.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
he totally learned to go to sleep when it was dark out. And now 7:30, whatever, when he's getting ready for bed, it's still light out. And he's like, Mom, I'm not going to bed.
Yep.
I'm like, okay, but we are. It goes back to that routine, and I know it throws kids for a loop, but I think it throws adults for just as much of a loop. But yeah, that's my weather rant, world rant. People are like, oh my God, she always talks about the weather. But I do, because it really does affect our mood.
It
and
does.
I live somewhere where we get all 4 seasons, and that could be in the same week. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But jumping right into it, just getting down to the nitty gritty and what we're here for. Tell us a little bit more about your mental health journey.
Yeah. So I'm in New Jersey now, but I grew up in Vermont. So I grew up in a pretty small town. I had a lot of family like dysfunction growing up. So I experienced a lot of trauma early in my childhood. Um, and that also led me to develop an eating disorder like in my teenage years. Um, which I'm now like in a really good place with. But obviously, through all of that, it's definitely kind of led me into this field of mental health, seeing it from my own side and wanting to help others, with some of the same things maybe that I've experienced as well.
A lot of therapists that we've had on here, and you and I talked about this before when we spoke a little bit briefly, that
Yeah,
you don't expect your therapist to have issues of their own. And for
absolutely.
whatever reason, I guess like we have that stigma in our brain where it's like, well, if you're a little fucked up, why am I going to talk to you about why I'm a little fucked up, But I feel like a lot of people are able to appreciate therapists more when they come on and tell their story, and really the field that they decided to be in for therapy or whatever they specialize in stems from personal experience.
Yes, yeah. And I know personally, like I've been in therapy and I can kind of tell sometimes when someone has experienced or if they haven't. Just being able to relate in a different.
What would you say is like an indicator that you've noticed of like, okay, someone might not have like personal experience? Like, what have you noticed then?
Yeah, so I try to be like understanding of everyone, and everyone experiences things differently too, so I think that's challenging sometimes. But I know, one time I went to a therapist, and this was my first time also with like a male therapist, so that was a new thing. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, but this therapist, like, I think first sessions are always so hard sometimes because you're sharing a lot of personal information. You don't really know the person yet. So I'm like opening up to this person about my family, and toward the end he goes, "You don't have to like let this still bother you." And I was like, "Okay, clearly like he hasn't, right, been through a trauma
Sure.
where it's not just like I'm upset that they ate the last slice of pizza. Like this is something very
Right.
deep.
It's like the when you
Yeah.
have the people that tell you when you're, oh, I'm anxious. We'll just calm
Right.
down. It's fine.
Yeah. Like just stop worrying.
Right. It's okay.
Yeah.
Just shake it off. And it's like, oh shit, that's not how that works.
Yeah. So definitely those kinds of experiences are just like not having that understanding of how trauma can really affect you. And even early on in my therapy journey, a lot of what I experienced with my trauma and PTSD, I was told was anxiety, um, which like is also true for me. But there was more going on that wasn't necessarily being addressed in the beginning.
Yeah, I think that you probably got a better understanding when you were able to actually start your career, I would say, where things started like making more sense and like lining up.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm a definitely a different person from when I even started grad school to become a therapist. Like, just understanding more about myself and about my experiences. And that's why I think it's just so important to be diagnosed properly too, so like what you're feeling is normal and that other people feel that way too.
Right. Because I know like a lot of people that unfortunately nowadays with all the resources that are available that might not be the best sources of information, like TikTok and all of those things. I'm sure you've had a handful of people that have been like, oh, well, I saw this online. So, like, yeah, that's me. And you're like, oh, that's not necessarily how that works.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
just because you relate to one part of the TikTok that you heard does not mean that you are battling X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I will say that's been one of my pet peeves as a therapist.
The self diagnosing from TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that we talk about mental health, obviously, right? Like, and that's a huge part of your show. I love that. But I think, you just have to be so careful. You don't know where you're getting your information from, and diagnosis is very complicated sometimes.
I think that a lot of people now have more resources to get that proper diagnosis than they did before. I
Yeah.
mean, even probably for you and I, example, I don't know your age, obviously, but I was diagnosed in college in
Mhm.
2016 when I was a senior. I didn't have the resources, and I have talked about this before in previous episodes. You know, resources weren't that available.
Mhm.
I was even surprised they were able to just tell that from me talking from personal experience, like, oh, it's probably anxiety, you know,
Right.
but it was very generic. It was like, okay, it's probably anxiety. Here's your medication. Have a nice day. And I was like,
Right.
oh,
Like, there's more here, and yeah, like, we're about the same age. I finished college, undergrad in 2017, so, um,
so
yeah,
you're
it was.
gearing up for 30 as well.
Yes.
Oh,
I know.
it's the
Um,
worst. I'm having like my own little mental breakdown with that. And I've said
mhm.
this before to other people on here, and they're like, it's just 30. I'm like, it's not just 30. I'm like,
Y
it's a big deal.
yeah,
I was like, my 20s are gonna be done.
I
It's not
know.
okay. I didn't approve of this.
And I do think in some ways, for me at least, it's like, I'm excited in a way for that. Like, I think the past 3 or 4 years of my life have been the best so far, because I've, like, really understood myself and really been able to find my people, you know?
I can relate to that. I think that I've done the most growth
Mhm.
recently that I've ever done in my entire life. So I think that the past couple of years, yeah, I could agree that you know, for me, they weren't probably the best, but I think that it's going to be a good year. I think I'm going to have one of those years where I've found my people that I can talk to about these things. I've started this podcast and have grown in
Mhm.
this community and talked to so many wonderful people, including yourself. You know, and it's great. We need that. That environment to grow in is huge for mental health.
Yeah, definitely, and it's, like, something I've experienced and I hear from my clients of feeling kind of isolated, right? Like, nobody understands, but more people understand than we know, they just don't talk about it. So I think talking about it, like what you're doing, is amazing.
I definitely like to give people the platform to share their story, whatever that looks like, and just really a safe place because, yes, anxiety or any other mental illnesses do sometimes take away that safety net, right?
Mhm.
And it's hard. It's hard to find your way. And I do believe that mental health is still one of the hardest things to explain to someone,
Yeah,
especially if they've never battled. It's really
definitely.
hard from an outsider perspective looking in. I mean, even those that do battle anxiety, everyone's different and it looks different, but at
Yeah.
least they kind of get the general gist of it. So you don't
Mhm.
seem completely like baffled telling them.
Right.
But it's just, yeah, it's just easier when we take that power back and don't feel alone and find those people. So it's easier said than done, though. I know it's hard
Yeah.
to open up about mental health and you know it puts people in a very vulnerable spot, but you know
Mhm.
we got to do it, we got to get through it that way.
Yeah, and I think for myself and for other people too, the struggle can be that not everyone's mental health is always so obvious from the outside. Like, I know I have tried a lot, like, in my life to kind of hide it or to not show that. So, for other people, it can be like, well, you seem fine, right? Or you don't seem like you struggle with that. And it can be almost like invalidating in a sense because, like, it's like, yeah, I try really hard so that you don't see that.
Yeah, I can agree with that as well. I think we've all kind of experienced something like that where again it kind of puts shame and
Hmm.
you'd feel very, what is the word, not unimportant, but you just feel very defeated.
Yeah.
And you know you almost don't feel worthy sometimes when these mental illnesses take over and you're really battling. So it's definitely good to find those people like we've said. If you don't mind me asking, because what
Yeah.
kind of caught my attention is why did you try to hide it specifically?
Yeah. So, I think a lot of it came from My family is pretty religious, so growing up, religion was involved in my life, and that was a piece where it was like, okay, go to God, right? And
Sure.
figure it out in that way. Which I'm definitely not against religion at all, but I think my family wasn't necessarily open to, or it wasn't available, like certain mental health services when I was younger. Yeah, and I think also like a big theme in my family was don't talk about it, just in general, like kind of sweep things under the rug. And I know that's common for so many people of just, you know, don't share your secrets essentially with other people.
I think that it's sad, but a lot of people that I've spoken with, and I'm sure in your practice
Hmm.
you see this, these issues start at home. Whatever that looks like, whatever age, they
Hmm.
start at home. And as a parent for myself, that is like the biggest heartbreak
Yeah.
because I was fortunate enough to not experience this at home. I
Hmm.
kind of just fell into my own anxiety, whether it was just because the environment I was in or whatever.
Right.
But it's heartbreaking for me that it just seems like so many adults now our age, they were like,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, this started at home. Like my parents didn't
Yeah.
have conversations with me about mental health. They didn't know what to look for. They didn't really acknowledge it,
Hmm.
and all of the signs could have been there for them to do it, but it wasn't talked about because they weren't talked about it with their parents.
Absolutely.
So it's just, I mean, I'm assuming again, do you also see that in your practice? Like that's pretty much a common theme?
Yeah, and I think what's amazing about our generation is we're really trying to change that. What I find it so healing sometimes to see, like, kids coming into therapy and parents saying, I want to do this differently. I want to be more conscious. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And I love parents that are advocates for their children's mental health because we need that.
Yeah,
We really need that no matter what it looks like. Even just telling them it's okay to have a bad day, that can go a long way instead of
definitely.
shaming them, for getting upset about something or not being in the mood to do something,
Hmm.
having those open conversations with them. It's very, yes, like you said, it's very valuable and it's really great to see because I do think that our generation is kind of changing the way that we talk to our children, raise our children, and just
Hmm.
opening that conversation again to normalize mental health is a real thing,
Yeah.
and it needs to be talked about. And it's a safe place to do so in your home if you need to. Like that's where it should start.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of my healing journey has also come from being able to understand, what happened to me was not okay when I was younger, but that a lot of it does come from the fact that my parents also struggle with their mental health and substance use, and that they were only capable of doing so much for me. Um, and the whole idea of like, intergenerational trauma, and they didn't get the help that they needed for whatever reason, so that they couldn't support me the way I needed.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like how can they help you if they weren't really able to help themselves at that point? And I
Yeah.
think now, again, going back to it, our generation does have a little bit better of tools and understanding where, okay,
Mhm.
even if you were diagnosed with anxiety or something 10, 15 years ago, at this point, you have so much more information as a person when they obviously didn't even have those resources alone, let alone,
Yeah.
they have it now, but some of our parents are, in their 50s and 60s and 70s. So it's
Right.
just like, well, to them, they've already dealt with it. So it's not as, might not be as quote unquote traumatizing, but they've just gotten used to it. That's life for them.
Yeah, it's their normal. And I think, as a child also, what we grow up with is our normal. And you don't always realize that it's abnormal until a little bit later in life. And that's kind of what happened to me. Like my family, I thought was a normal family, until I kind of understood a little bit differently.
So what, if you don't mind me asking again, like
Yeah.
what kind of led you to that then, that you're like, "Oh, this might have like not been right."
Yeah, so early on, a lot of it, some of the signs I saw were like going to sleepovers at friends' house. I'm like, okay, like their family is different from mine. Um, and just as I got older, it just became, more and more obvious that this wasn't the way that other people's families functioned.
Sure.
Yeah, and definitely even just going forward to being an adult, like I'm married and it's to my like college sweetheart. So
Aw,
yeah,
congratulations.
he's amazing.
Not
Yeah.
many people can say that these days.
Yeah, we met when we were 18, so it was so funny that
Wow.
yeah, but I think, entering into a relationship and a serious relationship really like made that super clear for me of okay, this wasn't really like a normal upbringing necessarily. Not that there's a normal,
Right? I was say, do we have normal? Like, my
no.
therapist personally gets so pissed off when I say that. She's like, what even is normal? I'm like, I don't know,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean, damn it. Like, it's like you get it, but just
Yeah.
yeah. And so another like thing, and you don't have to answer if you're not comfortable with, but
Yeah.
does your significant other battle any mental health issues himself?
Yeah, so he has ADHD, so that's
Okay.
also yeah, it's interesting, you know yeah, me,
I
um
love my ADHD friends that I've met, so that's why I giggle, and they know it's a
yeah,
good giggle, but I know that someone's got a good story about them.
yes. Yeah, it's definitely interesting in how it plays out in a relationship, it's something that we've both worked on together, but I love him for it, he's an amazing person.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a beautiful thing when you like get into a relationship with somebody who understands. I
Yeah,
think that's the biggest thing when we are battling as adults, that you have those people, and it's not just family or friends, but it's the
right.
person you want to spend your life with, because that's
Yeah,
important. You need to feel safe. And it's hard to feel safe when you are battling a mental illness sometimes. So it's almost like I need to find my safety net in a
mhm,
person. So
yeah,
it's great that you're able to connect with him, and I'm sure you guys have great conversations about mental health then, especially I don't know what he does for a living, but the field that you're in,
mhm.
that's a win-win.
Yeah, and it's funny actually, he's also a therapist, like,
Ah,
recently. Yeah.
okay.
So, we definitely do talk about, like, all things mental health, and I love that we can,
I
like,
love
share
it. Can I come over for dinner?
for sure.
I'm coming to New Jersey. Let's go.
Perfect. Yeah, but, you know, I'm just thinking this in my brain, when you were talking earlier with your check-in about, like, self-sabotage, like, I was thinking to myself, I so relate to that,
Okay, good.
that
I'm glad that at least now I feel a little bit better, you
yeah.
know. Because sometimes when I do these check-ins, I'm like, people are gonna think that I'm like fucking nuts. Like they're gonna be like, "What are you talking about? That you're panicking about
Right.
not panicking." But like that happens. Like
Oh, yeah.
sometimes our brain is like so on like the anxiety highs, and
Mhm.
when you come down finally, you're like, "But wait, why aren't we back up there?"
Yes, yeah, and it's like, yeah, now I'm at a point in my life where I feel safe and, like, I'm really comfortable in my relationship, with my career, but I'm like, "Okay, when is something gonna go wrong?" Like
See?
Yeah,
We're waiting for it. It's terrible. But I
yeah,
think that is so I'm sure that also has to do with like the whole fight or flight, that
yeah,
anxiety obviously and heightens in us, where
mhm.
we're like always ready to go. Like I always tell people, I am a like first class flyer over here. Like,
Yes,
I am just like, see you later. Like,
I'm ready.
yeah, I am always ready for that.
Mhm.
Um, but good. That is good then. I feel a little bit better now. Cause yeah, I'm always like, I don't know. People are going to be like, that makes no sense. But I feel like, again, talking about this, someone always has that, oh, I relate to that. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's the whole point. It's like
Mhm.
they might not have the words or the space to articulate that, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to throw it out here. And if it sticks, it sticks.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised, right, how often people do feel the same way.
You honestly, especially in this field itself, I'm sure you deal with that a lot where people
Yeah.
probably come in telling you like nobody understands and that they feel
Mhm.
alone. And that's what these illnesses do to us, right? They take
Yeah.
away that that like not freedom necessarily, but that drive that sometimes makes you feel like
Mhm.
purposeful. Or sometimes it's like, well, what am I doing? Like anxiety can take away so much. And so can all these other mental illnesses. They take away so much from you where
Yeah.
you do feel like, yeah, it's probably just me going through this. And it's like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, definitely, and that's even a conversation I've had with my own therapist recently of, like, trauma can make you feel so isolated sometimes and just, like, wanting to feel like other people understand, but just that feeling of, like, "Okay, I'm kind of alone in this," or "I feel like I'm alone in this."
Yes, I relate with that
Mhm.
100%, and I think a lot of us can, where if they don't have the resources to even go to therapy as well, you feel that 20 times worse, where you're
Yeah.
like, "Holy cow, I am alone."
Mhm.
So, it's, definitely, I like to tell people they're not alone, and I know
Mhm.
that's cliche, but they're not alone. There's a ton of people in this community willing to give advice, give help, just be a ear, even a hug, whatever it takes, because we're not alone.
Yeah.
And as humans, even just us ourselves, like we can relate to somebody one way or the other, whether
Mhm.
it doesn't physically appear like we can. There's always something there to be relatable, I like to believe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we definitely need people to continue sharing their stories. And I'm so happy you're here with us today to do that.
Yeah.
And when
Thank
we
you.
were doing a little bit more digging and
Mhm.
learning, tell us a little bit more about what the IFS is that you are trained in.
Sure, yeah. So, um, it's like internal family systems. So, basically, the short version of it is like we all have different parts of ourselves. Um, it's funny. The movie Inside Out is based on this. So, the way that
Oh,
it,
is that the movie with the little angry people and like they all
yeah,
have the feelings?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, that movie's
Oh,
adorable.
yeah, I love
Okay.
it. Yeah, I talk about it a lot in my sessions.
Now I'm
But
gonna go watch that after this. So,
yeah. Um, but yeah, it was based on this theory, and it's the idea that like we all have different parts of ourselves. And the inventor of the theory, like he came up with this because for people with like eating disorders or with certain types of diagnoses, like sometimes it's easier to kind of separate it from yourself a little bit. Where it's like, sometimes our mental health disorders can make us say and do things that really aren't aligned with who we are.
right.
And so I think it's helpful to say like, this is my eating disorder talking or this is my trauma talking. And the goal in IFS is to kind of get all of your parts to like work together. Because there's this idea that like maybe the reason you're in therapy or the reason you're feeling a certain way is because your different parts are like fighting against each other. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like, yeah, like getting them to work together, you know?
Huh. That's interesting, and I like that. I actually might talk to my therapist about that because I think that no, because honestly, you laugh, but I think that
Yeah.
maybe that is kind of like that self-sabotage because
Yeah.
why, something is not agreeing with the fact that I'm doing good. There's
Yeah.
some part of me right now that's like, I don't know about that. Like
Mhm.
maybe, so yeah,
Mhm.
that's actually very interesting.
Yeah, I find it to be like a really good way to understand myself and understand my clients, of just like, okay, right, like you were saying, there's a part of you that doesn't want to feel like happy with where you're at for some reason, right? There's some resistance there and like trying to figure out where that comes from.
There's probably a little crabby old lady inside me somewhere, just
Yeah.
like, "No, we're not having fun today."
Mhm.
Sitting there, "Get off my grass." You know? She's
Yeah.
in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
And like you can have fun with it. Like you can name it. Sometimes my clients like name their eating disorder. Um, and it's like it's a monster or it's something in you, like especially working with kids, like it's helpful to see it in that way of like, We
Oh,
have like
sure.
the worry monster or, the sadness monster or whatever. And I think it's a good way to like imagine it for yourself.
And again, it's almost like taking away that power again,
Yeah.
which is huge. And I think it helps you be able to kind of make light of the situation and get through it a little bit better,
Hmm.
and take back some of that control that it does take away from you.
Yeah. Right. Because when you're in it, sometimes it feels like you are just your diagnosis, but knowing like there are other parts to you and being able to like, you know, nec- excuse me, recognize all of those parts.
That's definitely like having a lot of understanding for yourself, I've noticed is huge. And just compassion towards yourself, which is something that I've recently tried to work on a little bit better, is
Yeah.
giving myself grace and understanding and knowing that, right, just because I have anxiety and I battle panic disorder, it doesn't mean that that's
Mhm.
who I am. You
Yeah.
know, the anxiety could come and go, but like all the other attributes to myself are still here. That's
Hmm.
not just all we are. So yeah, it's very much so, like you said, holding yourself accountable to an extent too of how you're feeling, why you're feeling that way, and then just kind of reiterating that over and over again, like
Hmm.
I'm not this, and there's all these other parts to me. But obviously that's not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah. But, starting even small, I say this all the time to my clients and they probably get annoyed, but I'm like, you know, just changing the language around it and saying, like, my anxiety is telling me XYZ, or, my eating disorder is telling me this, right? Instead of like thinking this is coming from me.
I get that too. That's probably very helpful, especially if you're a little bit younger.
Yeah.
To, like you said, make light of it and make it a little bit
Mhm.
easier for us. It's such a hard thing, especially for these kids to deal with.
Yeah, definitely.
So I know that in your practice, you said you like to integrate nature. What does
Mhm.
that look like?
Yeah, so I was inspired to do this from a professor I worked with in my master's program. So she integrates like nature into most of her sessions. There's just a lot of research that being in nature is really good for us, for so many reasons. So the idea of like integrating nature into therapy, I think it helps like break down some of those barriers. When we think about therapy, sometimes it's like the leather couch and like, whatever kind
Oh,
of,
yeah.
yeah, those stereotypes. So I like to integrate it in a few different ways. Like, a lot of my mindfulness activities revolve around nature. Um, Even if we're in my office, it's like, okay, think about being outside somewhere, that they choose. And I do, it's called like walk and talk or ecotherapy, where we go, we can pick a park or a place nearby and go there. Obviously, you have to make sure the person understands, right? Like we're going in a public place, but being able to walk around and do a session outside, I think can be really helpful for a lot of people because you're not just sitting and talking.
I'm sure. Have you seen a good response to that from people as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's certain people that prefer it for sure. And the
Yeah, I'd be
idea,
like, so can we go sit on the beach?
yeah, I mean, we
Can we
do
go to the beach
actually,
today?
yeah, we live pretty close to the beach. So it is something that I have not done yet with clients, but I've thought about it and it's definitely doable.
Okay, so not only am I coming over for dinner, we're going to the beach.
Sounds good.
I guess my question to you
Hmm.
is you've battled eating disorders as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah.
And that's something that you talk about with people that see you, your clients, is that's something that you specialize in. How would you say that an eating disorder and mental health play off of each other?
Yeah. So I think there are some parallels between eating disorders and substance use. And, they have their differences too, but a lot of times there's some underlying reason for an eating disorder. just like with substance use. So, whether that be trauma or anxiety, like you see a lot of perfectionism in eating disorders. Um, so there's like a lot of like kind of traits that can maybe lead you to developing something like that.
And then how were you able to recognize that you were having a problem yourself then with that? Like, is it just as easy to kind of pin down as anxiety?
Honestly, no. My journey was definitely like an up and down. I did not really get the help that I maybe needed for my eating disorder when it was at its worst. So that's another thing that, working in the field, like it feels really good to be able to help people in a way that I never received. Um, yeah, so again, it started when I was a teen, and um, like people were like concerned at school, like nurses and my guidance counselor and stuff, but I think again, my parents weren't really super open to mental health treatment. So I never really fully worked through my eating disorder until even after college. And that it showed up in different ways throughout that period of my life that maybe I thought I had kind of healed from it and realizing that I didn't as much as I thought.
And I guess, like, for me, and I think I've kind of asked a couple of folks this that have dealt with things as a child,
Hmm.
do you think if your parents would have been more understanding and open to conversations about mental health and what that entailed and looked like, that you could have resolved this sooner?
I mean, yeah, I like to think about the what ifs, and it always leads me back to, I am where I am now, and
Right.
but I definitely do, feel that way. And um another thing that I don't know that we had talked about this previously, but like something I had struggled with as a teen was self-harm. And that was something that I shared with my parents. And their response was kind of like, well, we don't do that. Like they were like, we don't do that in this family. Um, and so from there on, I was like, okay, I can't talk about it. I can't share,
Right.
how I'm feeling. So it was really kind of all on me to get better and to do what I needed to do until I got to college and had the resources to like get help.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I feel like too, even if we do have the resources, sometimes we feel like it still is inevitably up to us, which is like a
Yeah.
huge, misconception. Because I think that it's not all on us. I mean, I know
Hmm.
that we're the one driving the bus and you have to take control and, be what is it? Like, be very clear and open with what you're experiencing and feeling, but you
Hmm.
still do need to have good people and the right people around you for that.
Yeah, definitely have like a support system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess, like, for me, I've seen a lot of people that have been like, oh, kind of talking about parallels again, where they're like, I
Hmm.
battle anxiety and I also suffer from depression. Those
Hmm.
two tend to go hand in hand sometimes. Do you think that with an eating disorder that tends to lead to turning into a higher anxiety level? Or would you see that more parallel with depression? Or even anything else? Like, is there a
Yeah.
parallel that comes along with it?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it can go in multiple directions. And something I learned in grad school is it's almost like it's more common almost to have multiple disorders than to just have one for a lot of the case.
Sure.
Yeah, so eating disorders definitely can contribute to either anxiety or depression, or sometimes there's a huge connection between OCD and an eating disorder.
Oh, okay.
I think I mentioned this before, but trauma is very connected with eating disorders.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, so there's certain disorders maybe that might make you, or certain experiences that make you more likely to have
More
one.
susceptible. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Gotta love the environment and everything that we deal with.
Hmm.
I know that You've obviously, like you've said, you've had a good handle on things. The past 4 years have been a lot better for you. What would you say that you do to stay on your path today?
Yeah, so for me, like having a really good group of people that, like friends and having that support system has been really helpful. Um, especially not having a great relationship with family. I think, and this is a common experience for people with like dysfunctional families, it kind of forces you to focus more on friendships. So that's definitely something that's really helped me. And then just personally, I find a lot of meaning in like, just some of the stuff you said before, like spending time with my dogs, like being outside. Um, I like to journal as like a way to cope for myself. Um, yeah, I'm just trying to think what else, but yeah, just like trying to find things I enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be at the beach, so.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me, just again, I'll say this over and over, the
Mhm.
therapists that we have on here that talk about their trauma or their issues, anxiety, disorders, everything. They're real people too. They're battling it, they're dealing with it. My last question for you,
Yeah.
do you think that you are at a disadvantage or an advantage that you have battled some of the things that you discussed with your clients?
I think it definitely helps me. Um, it's easier for me to understand like how difficult it is to put in the work sometimes. Um, and that like changing habits are really hard, like it's not
Oh, yeah.
so yeah, it's not so easy to just say like, all right, go exercise or go journal. Like it really is hard to be consistent. And that's like another big piece for me of like doing well is my therapist has helped me so much. And she calls me out on my shit, which I love. I need that. And medication, like I was it's almost hard to admit this, but like I was very against medication for myself for a long time.
Oh,
And
sure.
yeah, and as a therapist, like I would recommend that like to people. I'd say give it a shot if you want it, but it was hard to admit for myself that it was something I needed. And but it's made like a huge difference in my life. And just learning to come to terms with that too.
Yeah, and I guess like I mean, yes, it seems like you would agree that you have an advantage
Yeah.
having dealt with these specific things and then your clients have dealt with similar things. But at any point do you think that it's I don't like the word triggering, but
Mhm.
do you like how do you get through those interactions then? Like that's always interesting to me if that makes sense. Where
Yeah.
like, if there's a patient that comes in that's talking about X, Y, and Z, and you've also battled X, Y, and Z, how
Mhm.
do you like move yourself from taking it like, do you know what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
I
no,
feel like I'm having a brain fart.
yeah,
Like, how
no,
do you not take it personal, I guess? Or like, how do you just like,
yeah.
put up those boundaries for yourself?
It's a very common thing for therapists, like whether you have been through your own mental health or not, that we're it's a very personal relationship and you're just bound to have things that you relate to with people. So it's something that you talk a lot about in school, and after you finish school, there's a certain amount of time that you're under supervision. So that time was really helpful for me to kind of find the tools to cope with that. Um, I think just awareness, like being able to say, like, okay, yeah, I'm having a reaction to this. And sometimes that looks like me doing deep breathing in sessions, or me,
Sure.
yeah, like me just trying to ground myself to be the best therapist that I can be for my clients. Um, just being able to like acknowledge that at the end of the day and say, that was kind of hard to hear, you know. I hear some heavy stuff, and I'm
I'm
glad to,
sure.
yeah, I'm glad to do it. I love like being able to hold that space for my client, but being able to also take care of myself at the end of the day, and know that I'm hearing this stuff that could bring up things in my past, but I'm doing it for a reason.
Yeah, and it's awesome. We really need therapists to continue doing what they do, and I mean, it's just great that
Mhm.
again, so many therapists that I've spoke to, I haven't had one that's been like, "Oh yeah, I have no issues." You
Yeah.
know, it's great. Like, and then you have some people that are like, "Well, yeah, I mean, you have a lot of like messed up things that happen to you, so you usually become a therapist."
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, so I love it. I love my therapist friends, and I
Mhm.
really appreciate you coming on here and discussing with us just your story and your journey a little bit with mental health and what that's looked like.
Yeah.
And for
Thank you.
everyone listening, if they want to reach out to you, how can they find you on social media?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram for my practice, which I don't you could share it if you want to, or
We will definitely share
okay,
it as well.
perfect.
What is the handle for that, your name on there?
Yeah, so it's healing, like the word healing, and then IMNJ.
Awesome. I really do appreciate you coming on here and just really shedding light on another area that we needed to hear. And you bring a ton of value to the industry itself. And I'm just really happy we made the time to have this conversation together.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we're not going to push that panic button, guys. We're going to figure it out. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you.